Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining the Seattle Mayoral Candidate Forum on Gun Violence. We have more than 300 people RSVP to join us here on Zoom, and I know that others will be watching us live on Facebook. My name is Renee Hopkins, and I'm the CEO of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. Before we dive in, I have the honor of sharing a few brief housekeeping notes. Please stay muted during the duration of the forum so that we can ensure that there are no distractions. The event is best viewed in speaker mode. You can edit this setting by clicking on the button in the upper right part of your screen that says view, and then select speaker. Feel free to keep your cameras on if you feel comfortable. And if you'd like to see or share a recording of this event afterwards, you will be able to find it on the Alliance for Gun Responsibility's Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Alliance for Gun Responsibility. We will also be streaming this program again at 7 p.m. tonight. We're so proud to be hosting today's event in partnership with our friends, Grandmothers Against Gun Violence, and we're extremely grateful for our media sponsor, the South Seattle Emerald. I also want to say a huge thank you to the candidates joining us today. We appreciate you taking the gun violence epidemic seriously and taking the time to be here to share your positions and ideas with us. As I think everyone with us today knows, gun violence is one of the most urgent issues facing our community.
I'm unmuted and I'm still not hearing anything.
In Washington state, there are more than 800 people who are killed by guns every year. 3/4 of those deaths are suicide, 20% are homicide, many are domestic violence related, and 3% are officer involved. We know that, like the pandemic, the gun violence epidemic falls hardest on Black and Brown communities. We also know that gun violence epidemic was only made worse by the pandemic. The economic hardship, social disruption, and the dramatic spike in gun sales increased the risk of every type of gun violence, from suicide to domestic violence to community violence. And sure enough, in 2020, Seattle saw the highest number of homicides in more than 25 years. Driven in part by a rise.
Damn it, I'm trying to correct that. And I'm trying to get in so I can hear.
The last years also brought a historic national uprising, calling to dismantle white supremacy and end police violence. 1 year later, voters are eager to see more than just statements from local leaders. We know that this crisis is not inevitable. There are steps we can and must take to reduce gun injuries and death. And the Seattle mayor has a critical role to play in the fight against gun violence. The mayor is a key player in implementation of existing gun laws, overseeing law enforcement, funding community violence, prevention programs, and advocating for statewide progress, and much more. To qualify for today's forum, candidates needed to meet 2 criteria. They needed to participate in the endorsement process of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility Victory Fund and have at least 1,000 donors to date. All of Seattle's mayoral candidates were invited, and these 5 candidates were the only ones who met both of that criteria. With that, let's dive in. I'm really pleased to introduce our moderator today. Marquez Harrison Green is a lifelong Seattleite, publisher of the South Seattle Emerald, and a columnist with the Seattle Times. Growing up in South Seattle, he experienced firsthand the impact of one-dimensional stories on marginalized communities, teaching him the value of authentic narratives. After a stint in the investment world, Marcus returned to South Seattle to tell stories with nuance and complexity with the hope of advancing social change. This led him to found the South Seattle Emerald and bring attention to stories and communities that had long gone uncovered. He was awarded the Seattle Human Rights Commission's Individual Human Rights Leader Award for 2020, and we are honored to have him with us today. Marcus, take it away.
Thank you, Renee. It's an honor to be here as well. And that was tremendous poise that you showed, by the way. I want to say that addressing gun violence is a critical issue for me personally. My South Seattle community was recently touched by bouts of gun violence over the last couple of weeks. It has one of the highest rates in the city, unfortunately. I've also personally lost friends to gun violence So I think today's forum is essential in terms of deciding on a direction for our city.
But I'm not.
I know that public safety is a space where the five candidates, or our candidates today, I should say, agree a lot on. I know that each of these candidates knows we can do more to prevent gun violence in all its forms to keep Seattleites safe. Our goal today is to find out what exactly they would do to create the safer, more just, more equitable future we're all looking for. I do want to thank you to everybody, the hundreds that are watching and tuning in, for submitting your questions. And thank you to the candidates for being here to address this urgent issue today. Now, we do have a lot of ground to cover, so I want to get into it. We will start with a round of introductions and opening statements. Then we will do a flash round where I will ask a series of questions, and each candidate will respond with either a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Candidates, please do make sure to have your paddles ready. After that, we will go into individual questions from community members and a couple of follow-up questions. And finally, assuming that we all stick to the time, we will have closing statements where each candidate will have 1 minute to give one. Now, we will have a timer on screen for each section, and I will not be shy about cutting anyone off. I am from South Seattle. So anyhow, now without further ado, we do want to get into our opening statements. We are going to give each candidate 2 minutes to introduce themselves and answer this question. If you could wave a magic wand and do one thing to address the gun violence epidemic, what would it be? We are going to go alphabetically by last name to begin with. So Colleen, that means you are up first. You have 2 minutes.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marcus. It's good to be with everyone today and to talk about such an important subject. You know, I was preparing for today, and I will be honest, I started feeling a little like emotional. I just want to be aware for those of us who have experienced gun violence that this can be potentially triggering, that this is a hard thing. I think you referenced it already, Marcus. And I, as a Native American woman, I can tell you that I have seen far more than my fair share of gun violence in my community. As a young person, as a teenager, I have had to experience the loss of friends and family. As the executive director of the Chief Seattle Club for the past 7 years, I had to experience gun violence that came through our windows at our organization, all the way up into where our elders sit to eat dinner, to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so this is something that is near and dear to me. It's also important because I'm running for mayor. I care about this community. And we know that we've had 6 homicides since June 16th and 14 violent incidents. This is a tragedy and is something that we have to take greater concern for and action in order to see this stop in our communities. And so if I had that magic wand, I would just get rid of all guns in this city and in this country, remove them from to remove them from this place, from this world. We don't need guns in this world. And so I'm anxious to get into this conversation. I want to invite everyone to, take care of themselves as we continue this conversation and know that we can do something more. I want to invite you to take a look at our website. We have a Seattle ceasefire plan to foster youth violence prevention, reduce shootings, improve life outcomes, and build better relationships in the community. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Colleen. Jessyn, same question to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Marcus, for moderating us today. Thank you, Alliance for Gun Responsibility, for hosting us. And thank you to everyone for being here and my fellow candidates. My name's Jessyn Farrell, and I am running for mayor of Seattle. And I believe deeply that we can get to zero gun violence in this community. And if I could wave a wand, and as mayor, not waving wands, but using public policy and the tools of government and politics, I believe that we need to be treating the gun violence epidemic the same way we've treated the COVID-19 pandemic, which means to take all of our community resources for all of us to get off the sidelines, no matter what part of the city that you live in, and to join in this effort to get to zero gun violence. I am a former state legislator where I fought for policies like universal background checks. I have been on the board of Community Passageways, and I'm proud of the support of Dominic Davis, where that organization works every single day to keep young people in our community safe. And the good news is that we can prevent gun violence. It is absolutely preventable. And as mayor, I will be working to help communities thrive, because we know that communities that are healthy, have economic security, have less gun violence. We will be treating gun violence as the public health crisis that it is. In the same way we monitor COVID and have a COVID dashboard, I want to be monitoring gun violence and looking at every single homicide in our community intersectionally and how we can prevent it. I will be creating an Office of Gun Violence Prevention, where we can be using that multidisciplinary approach. And again, this is a moment where every single one of us needs to be doing our part, and it starts with the mayor and working with all of the great work that's already happening in community.
Jessyn, thank you for your answer. Ace, you're up next.
So thank you all for having me today. My name is Andrew Grant Houston, but as Marcus said, many people and my friends call me Ace. I am running to really start to break the cycles that I believe a lot of us are dealing with. As someone who is an architect, I not only have the experience of managing projects and really ensuring that from the very beginning to the very end, we do what we set out to do. I also have been trained as a creative problem solver. And so what I really believe is that in order to achieve an end to gun violence, and really in order to see an elimination of all preventable deaths in Seattle, what we really should be focusing on is redesigning our systems in order to provide the resources that community needs. And so in that vein, if I could wave a magic wand, what I would really focus on is ensuring that at the end of the day, every single person in our communities would be able to go home to an affordable place that they're not worried about losing, and that there would be food on the table. Because so many of the issues that we are dealing with when it comes to gun violence are really cries for help. They are crises for people, whether that be related to losing a job, whether that be related to domestic violence. What I believe our main focus should be is really about the system, about really providing the resources, breaking the cycle, and ensuring that we never get to a point where we have issues like this. I also am very aware that as a Black man in the United States, every time I leave my door, I'm not guaranteed to come home. And that's not just because of gun violence, it's also because of state-sponsored violence. And so I am fully aware that we also need to invest in harm reduction and alternatives in public safety. That means moving away from our current policing system.
With a few seconds to spare, thank you very much. Councilmember González, you have the next 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Before I answer this question, I just want to honor all of the lives that we have lost in our community to gun violence, whether it was at the hands of a police officer or another community member. These lives are precious lives that we'll never get back. And my deepest, most sincere condolences to anyone on this meeting today who has lost a loved one to preventable gun violence. I too am not immune from the insidious public health and pandemic crisis that is gun violence. I have lost personal family members to gun violence, and as a result, I have dedicated my time on the current city council to advocate for common sense local regulations of guns, from safe storage of firearms to making sure that we are appropriating the ammunition tax revenue to research at Harvard U to prevent gun violence, to making sure that we're increasing penalties for those who lost their firearms and failed to report them, and then those firearms were used in crimes, to trace evidence, to funding the regional domestic violence unit and moving it out of SPD and into the city attorney's office to ensure our harm reduction approach. This is the work that I want to be able to build on as an advocate, as an ally in this space as mayor of Seattle. If I had a magic wand, I would dismantle the insidious NRA and I would abolish all firearms in our city and in our state. I look forward to working with each of you on this important endeavor to tackle this public health crisis head on and treat it like the pandemic that it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And now moving, certainly, he might be last, but certainly not least. Bruce, you have the next 2 minutes.
Thank you, Marcus. So if I had that magic wand, I would remove from human beings that impulse to take a life, to kill. You know, the use of guns is symptomatic of a human being who lacks an appreciation, a love for life to be able to take a life. And so I would remove that. But because I don't have a magic wand, I would also work vehemently to remove RCW 941290, which is the state exemption law, to allow local jurisdictions the flexibility, the power, the authority to regulate and impose reasonable gun safety laws. Again, this issue is very personal for me. You do not live in the neighborhoods that I lived in the 60s in the Central District without knowing gun violence. We know who carried guns. We know who would use guns. The saddest part of all this is a preventable public health crisis. And yes, it disproportionately impacts BIPOC and lower income communities, but it affects us all. And it has grown in Seattle, where statistically, a full 50% of firearm homicides take the lives of Black residents. That's why I was the first candidate in this race to offer specific gun violence prevention ideas and the one to call for dedicated federal funding to address the surge in gun violence. Again, it affects all of our communities and the very fabric of sort of our existence. I could tell you story after story about what guns has caused. So when we get into our specific policy ideas, for example, I will establish an executive level position to coordinate citywide gun violence prevention policies and coordinate the work. So when we get into specific platforms, I think my passion in this area will become crystal clear to all of you. Thank you so much for hosting this forum.
Well, thank you, Bruce, and thank you everyone for participating in that section. And everybody was on time. That's like the first forum I've ever moderated where that actually ever happened. So thank you, everyone. We are going to move now to our flash round. So we'll have no timer for this round. I'm going to run through a series of very quick questions. Candidates, do all of you have your paddles? Okay. For those who don't, you can just use your actual thumb. And please respond by showing a thumbs up, saying that you either agree, or thumbs down, saying that you disagree. Everyone ready? Okay. First question. 40,000 Americans are killed by gun violence every year, and twice as many are injured. Suicide, domestic violence, interpersonal violence, police violence, unintentional shootings, and mass shootings are all forms of gun violence. Do you believe that all, yes, all, gun violence is preventable? Okay. Thank you. On to the next question. The first weekend in June is a time that gun violence prevention movement honors victims of gun violence and tries to build awareness by wearing orange. Did you participate in Wear Orange by attending an event, posting on social media, and are wearing orange that weekend? Okay, a lot of participation there. Okay, question number 3. On June 7th, the Alliance hosted a candidate training to inform candidates on the gun violence crisis in Washington and the opportunities local candidates have to be part of the solution. Thumbs up if you attended the training, thumbs down if you did not. All right, well, thank you to everybody who did make the time to join.
Let's hold that one for a while then, Marcus.
All right, next question. Washington State's preemption law prevents local elected officials from passing some gun safety policies. Will you do everything in your power to dismantle this law so that you can create policies specific to our city to help keep Seattle residents safe? All right, thank you. Next question. This year, the legislature passed a package of laws designed to hold police accountable, but there's still so much work to be done. Will you work to ensure the implementation of all the police accountability laws that passed in Olympia this year go forward? All right, thank you. Next question. Community-based violence interruption programs are key to preventing gun violence. Would you prioritize funding and expanding these local programs? All right. Just a shout out that our city is home to some great programs like Choose 180 and Community Passageways that work to interrupt and prevent violence. Make sure to check them out if you are not already familiar with them. Next question. Extreme risk protection orders are one of the best civil tools, not criminal law, we have for preventing people in a mental health crisis from harming themselves or others. Will you commit to launching a citywide public education campaign on this underutilized tool? All right. As we said before, our laws are only as strong as their implementation. All right, so next question. Candidate Harrell has stated that he will appoint a member of his cabinet dedicated to gun violence prevention. Who else will commit to adding a cabinet level position? All right, thank you. All right, next question here. We all agree children deserve to attend schools free from the fear of gun violence. Some argue that arming school resource officers is the best way to prevent school shootings. Do you support armed school resource officers in our schools? All right. Thank you. And final question here in this flash round. You're all here because gun violence prevention is a major part of your platform. So we can assume you've made that clear on your campaign website. Let's see a thumbs up if we can assess a gun violence issue area on, let's see a thumbs up if we can access a gun violence issue area on your website right now. All right. Well, that is it for our flash round. Thank you to all the candidates for playing along. Now, we are going to move into our next session, which is our tough but fair questions. Now, we're going to bring in in order to do this, we are going to bring in some community voices to this forum. Each candidate will be asked one question by an audience member, and that candidate will be given 3 minutes to respond. There may also be a couple of follow-up questions once that candidate responds as well. So first up, I want to welcome Cherie Rowe Proctor. Cherie Rowe Proctor. Let me make sure I got that right. Cherie, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. My name is Cherie Rowe Proctor, and I am on the board of Grandmothers Against Gun Violence. I'm a lifelong Seattleite and a grandmother of 7, 4 of which are boys and 2 of them are teenagers. My question is for ACE. You have called for reallocating the SPD funds to community programs, but you have not articulated anything specific on gun violence prevention. Now, we are all aware of gun violence associated with homicide, police brutality, and mass shootings. However, gun violence also plays a significant part in domestic violence and in suicide. As a candidate for mayor, do you have a gun prevention plan? And if elected Mayor Ace, what specific steps would you take to address this public health crisis?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. The way that I really approach gun violence and in essence, all the violence that we are seeing in our community is really focusing on harm reduction and preventative care. And so to your question's details, whether it be as a result of domestic violence or interpersonal violence, I believe in many of those cases, what we're experiencing is that we have not provided permanent affordable housing that we can move those victims and those survivors into. And so similar to that and a number of our other issues, I believe when we actually provide the resources that community needs, that we will actually see a significant reduction in gun violence. I think it's also really important, and kind of to the point earlier about not wanting to pass laws only in Seattle, that a lot of the issues that we are dealing with are affecting either the entire state or really the entire US. And so I believe it's really critical to partner with our state as well as our federal government in order to pass laws such as stricter background checks in order to ensure that we are also reducing the number of guns that are present in in our community. And I'm sorry, I'm recovering from a cold. In general, what I am really focused on when it comes to providing public safety in Seattle is that we need to be investing more in really supporting our community and building space for community to happen. And so for me, that includes investing in our public safety coordinator now position, which I want to expand into an actual group of individuals. I want us to see an increase in the number of community safety officers, which is actually non-armed response, and remove that from SPD and put that into the new public emergency services and communication center. And I also want to invest in programs that can help educate individuals in order to provide great resources for living wage jobs. I believe for many people, a lot of the violence that we see comes from crises and really struggling. And so when we actually provide opportunities and not necessarily just give people things, we are able to reduce gun violence and really prevent it from happening in the first place.
Thank you, Ace. I had just a quick follow-up for you. With some of the investments in the programs that you're talking about, how would you go about funding them?
So part of that is coming from the divestment from SPD. And on my website, I have actually a very clear list as to the things that I want to invest in. That includes a pilot for a universal basic income, as well as really recognizing the requests that have already been made by community-led public safety like Choose 180 and Community Passageway to actually provide them the funds to expand their programs. And so it's not necessarily about trying to reinvent the wheel. It's really about recognizing that we already have great individuals doing this work in community. We just need to actually provide them the resources to do that work even more.
All right, thank you for your answer. So now we're going to go ahead and move to Hazel Brown. Hazel, I want to invite you to ask your question. Can you please unmute and go ahead and take it away?
Totally. Hi, my name's Hazel Brown. I am a Seattle resident, a student at the University of Washington, and I'm a gun violence prevention advocate. Asking a question for Bruce. Some of your police reform ideas have been criticized and have left people feeling like your ideas lack accountability. You were on council when SPD entered into the consent decree that remains in place to this day. What changes would you make to ensure true accountability and oversight happens for Seattle police? Please be specific.
Sure. First of all, I think I'm the strongest on accountability. And I say that because I think I'm the only candidate who's actually cross-examined officers, fought against officers, fighting for justice in the courtrooms. The only candidate who's probably represented youth in the youth jail system, fighting for their lives. And I will say that the criticism had come from when I talked about I wanted the officers to look at the George Floyd video. And the point I made was, if they cannot fundamentally agree that was murder, that was an inhumane taking of a life, they have no place on the department at all. So under the most recent, well, let me backtrack for a minute. I was also the sole author of the Bias-Free Policing Initiative. I was the first proponent of body cameras, debating the ACLU at forums such as the University of Washington at Kane Hall, talking about that will hold our officers accountable such that I can get an evidentiary record as to what happens out there in the field. As I said earlier, my experience with the police and the experience of my community, and if you look at my website, you'll see Carl Mack, Gerald Hankerson, Don Mason, the faith-based community, leaders in social justice, Reverend Walden, on a police accountability. And there is a reason why they endorsed my candidacy, because people deal with high-level rhetoric on what police accountability looks like. I've been on the ground doing the work. So specifically, in terms of police accountability, when we renegotiate the next SPAW contract, we will get relief from the 180-day rule by which we do investigations. What we achieved on our last negotiation was the ability to appoint an inspector general. We were able to get 2 civilians on the OPA work that we wanted. We were able to get them to release their complaints on body cameras and get deployment of body cameras. What we will achieve on our next round will be the 180-day rule. We will increase the subpoena power of the OPA to make sure that we can get more evidence than currently exists. We will also make sure that we are recruiting differently. So when I talk about the new officer who will be a master at de-escalation, when I talk about looking at a granular way on where everywhere a gun and a badge goes, when I talk about a race and data initiative, we will look at not only what we see with the naked eye, but those trends, those institutional patterns we see that results in the lack of police accountability. We will also look at the judicial system to see who gets, where there's disparities in sentencing. So quite candidly, I welcome any criticism because that will make me better. But clearly I've outlined both the lived experience, the legislative record, and the future planning for police accountability. Bar none, I think, is one of the strongest candidates. Thank you for the question.
All right, Bruce, just a quick follow-up on you here. Do you think you could have done more to spearhead some of these police accountability initiatives that you're talking about now while you were previously on the council?
Thank you for the question. Explain that. So I was presiding at the council when the SPAW contract was presented, and I said what I said to many of my friends and co-workers in this world when they were criticizing what they considered watered down accountability. And what I specifically said was, what provision, we could all just do a narrative, what provision weakens accountability? Because on the 180-day rule, that's a management issue, that's a resource issue. And I know specifically what cases were gone sideways because we didn't meet that. But it was give and take because I wanted a universal deployment of body cameras. I wanted the inspector general position. So could we have done more? Absolutely. You don't hear excuses from me or my candidacy when I run. We could have done, but a labor negotiation is a give and take, and we got some really good stuff in there as well. But certainly we could have gotten more.
All right. Thank you, Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now I'm going to ask Brad Blackburn for his question. Brad, could you go ahead and please unmute yourself and share your question?
Thank you, Marcus. My name is Brad Blackburn. I was born and raised here in Washington. I'm an intern with the Alliance for Gun Responsibility and a current student at the University of Washington. My question is for Councilmember González. Public polling suggests that our current council remains unpopular with voters. One thing voters question is your vote on the last police contract, which subverted voter initiative 940 in the consent decree. What specifically would you do differently in the upcoming negotiation of the police contract that you think would produce better outcomes?
Thank you, Brad, for that question. Thank you so much. The previous council president just mentioned that he was the only candidate that has cross-examined officers. I have also cross-examined officers. I spent over 10 years as a civil rights attorney in the state. And so I have cross-examined officers all across the state. And fun fact, I actually asked a officer to tase me in the middle of a courtroom in front of a jury after he testified that tasing my client in an excessive force case was like an electric shock when you touch a doorknob. I won that case, proud to say that I got a not guilty verdict on behalf of my client, and then went ahead and sued the city of Brewster and was able to get the largest verdict in that jurisdiction to redeem the civil rights of my client. That's who I have been as a council member and as a member of this community, working on police accountability and reform issues specifically for over 15 years. Those are the values that show up with me every day, the voices of my past clients who were ridiculed, disrespected, subjected to extreme examples of excessive force and racial bias policing, both in our city and outside of our city, is what drives my passion and desire to be the next mayor of this city and to correct some of the issues in the SPOG contract and to once and for all get us in compliance with the consent decree. When I voted in favor of the 2018 SPOG contract, I did so by explaining clearly to members of the community that I saw that there were 3 key issues that were wrong with the contract, but that nonetheless, I believed that the wins that we were able to achieve by increasing civilian oversight through the creation of the Office of Inspector General, through increased civilianization of the Office of Police Accountability, and through creating permanency for the Community Police Commission, which at the time was considered to be temporary, were critical things to achieve and move forward. But in conjunction with that, I developed a resolution that memorialized concerns that I and fellow colleagues on the council continue to have about the bargaining, the collective bargaining contract. And I pushed the city attorney's office to put that resolution and those issues in front of the court to make sure that we can hear from Judge Robar whether or not we would continue to be in compliance. He agreed with the identification of issues that I identified, and I am going to, right now, I am currently working on correcting that collective bargaining agreement, and I have an opportunity, if elected to be mayor, to continue to build on that work and get these issues right.
Sorry, thank you very much for that, Councilmember González. I'm just curious, could you talk a little bit more about, getting it right this next go around here? Or excuse me, getting it right should you be elected mayor?
Sure. I mean, we're dealing with shaping the parameters right now. I continue to serve on the city's labor relations policy committee. There are 3 major issues that Judge Robar cares about that caused us to fall out of compliance with the consent decree. And it's all related to accountability. 1, subpoena powers. He wants to see that the Office of Inspector General and the Office of Police Accountability have full subpoena powers, and I am prioritizing that as a parameter right now. 2nd, arbitration. This is the process by which officers grieve discipline proceedings. There were some reform at the state level. Unfortunately, I'm sad to report that it will make no difference in the city of Seattle. So the next mayor must build on what happened at the state and once and for all go back to the non-arbitration venue in the police accountability ordinance. The third thing is around the calculation of the 180-day timeline. Again, those are the three things that need to be changed and championed by the next mayor in order to effectuate meaningful change and get us out of underneath the consent decree.
All right. Thank you, council member. All right, our next community member question comes from Diane Studley. Diane, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
My name's Diane Studley. Thank you, Marcus, for introducing me. And I'm a volunteer with the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. I am just so pleased to be here and see the emphasis being put on this public health crisis from you candidates that are running for Seattle mayor. And it's, I see your passion too, so that's great. My question's for Colleen. And I'm wondering, as a close ally of Mayor Durkan, why should Seattleites expect a better or different approach to gun violence and public safety from you? And what specific steps did the Durkan administration take that you would like to change?
Well, thank you so much for the question. And I want to say thank you for your volunteer work as well. You know, people have asked me about my connection with Mayor Durkan. And let me tell you a little bit about where I come from. You know, for my whole career, I have been working on behalf of some of the most marginalized people in our community. For the past 7 years, I have been working for Native people who have experienced the highest rates of homelessness in our city. Keep in mind that this is a Native city. This is a city that's named after a chief. And so I have been filled with passion and filled with anger and frustration that Native people have been left behind in this world that we live in. When I realized the rates of homelessness for my relatives, people that I know and love and grew up with, I decided that I would take it on. And I'll be honest, I sucked up to power. I did, and I would do it again in an instant because I was able to do things that no one else has been able to do for my community. I've been able to house hundreds and hundreds of people. I've been able to build affordable housing. We're $180 million of affordable housing. I took my agency budget from $500,000 to $17 million. And I did that by talking to people who'd never heard about Native homelessness, by talking to Mayor Durkan, by talking to council members, by talking to business and philanthropy. I was filled with passion for it because they deserved someone to fight for them. And that's the exact same kind of passion that I will bring to City Hall. And I can tell you that Mayor Durkan has not done nearly enough. If I was mayor in this time right now, where we've had tragedy after tragedy in our community, I would, number one, be down there if the families wanted it, talking with the families, being with them in their pain, because I have too experienced pain over gun violence. And then two, I would be asking for a ceasefire. I would be promoting the policies that I have been working on so hard to ensure that we are taking action right now. The same kind of tenacity that I have brought to the homeless work and to the Native community, I will bring to City Hall around gun violence. You know, we've declared Vision Zero around pedestrian safety. And we haven't done that around gun violence? That to me is totally out of balance. And as mayor of the city, I will be passionate and aggressive about it every single day. And not let it lay, not just wait for the next thing to happen. I think that you can see from my career and from the work that I have done is that I have been a change maker and stood for community every single time. And I will do that again as mayor of this city.
Thank you, Colleen. I did want to follow up by asking, you talked about, speaking with the families who are the victims of gun violence. How would you make sure what would a victim-centered approach look like, in terms of addressing gun violence should you be elected mayor?
Yeah, well, I would be, number one, wanting to know those families, wanting to stand with them in their grief and in their pain. And then two, when they were ready, when they had the healing, I would ask for their guidance and their leadership as we work together to end gun violence in our community. I believe those who are closest to the issue have the most wisdom, have the most leadership that should be leading the work in our community. And so I would be one, grieving with them, and two, asking for their leadership and guidance as we move forward in, with eliminating gun violence in our communities.
All right, thank you. Now, for our final community member, I do want to ask John Marquez to share his question. John, could you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you, Marquez. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is John Marquez, and I am 19 years old. I'm currently going to Highline College. I've lived in the Seattle/Bearden area my whole life. And I'm here on behalf of the Peacemaking Youth Academy. And like many other people, I'm just here to find a better way to go about gun violence. And, this is a thing that plagues our community, not only on a local level, but on a national, global scale, because it's not only, it's happening everywhere across the whole country. As you may know, gun violence has been, gradually increasing throughout the years. Just last year, 2020 and 2021, right now, which is, this year, gun violence has increased, I believe, by 25%. And, like I said, most people that are mostly affected by this, I feel like, I know that everybody's going through this, but brown and indigenous people of color seem to be, going through this, difficult wave of violence. And the most vulnerable people in our society are our youth. And, I think after recognizing this ongoing trend and reality that is troubling our community, this question is for Jessyn Farrell. What does your plan look like in terms of tackling this issue and providing the proper services to those deeply affected by the impact of gun violence, and providing the proper services for our youth and families if elected as mayor? And what role can we as young people take as a way of saying we need to make a change?
John, thank you so much for that question. Thank you so much for your advocacy. And I'm just going to start by saying it is really young people that are leading the way in our community and nationally, and the work that you are doing is truly making a difference. I want to talk a little bit about the intersectionality of gun violence prevention. In this state and in this city, we have so many amazing activists who have truly changed the trajectory of politics on gun violence in our community, whether it is putting the NRA on the run, passing ballot measures from universal background checks to 940. And so activists really matter. But I do want to say that too often, particularly in the white community, we are galvanized to action when there is a shooting in a suburban or affluent community. And this is a moment where all of us, particularly the white people in our community, particularly, my great former constituents in Northeast Seattle that worked so hard on so many gun ballot initiatives, have to put that same energy and relentless dedication into coming off the sidelines so that every single young person in our community, Black, Brown, Indigenous, every single child feels loved and cherished and supported for who he or she or they are. And that means really specifically that we need to invest in communities, those economic, social, and cultural supports that help people thrive. We know what those are, and we need to do that. We need to invest in those really great community organizations that too often are bearing the brunt of trauma and working with young people who are affected by gun violence. And from a city perspective, that means funding them for sure, but it also means recognizing that trauma takes time to heal, sometimes a really long time, longer than a budget cycle, certainly. and that we need to create the space and true partnership in terms of government and in terms of those community organizations. It means we need to recognize that government itself has been part of the trauma for a lot of people in our community, and that sometimes we need to make sure that we are centering and being, again, a partner as opposed to creating and perpetuating trauma. And that's why I'm advocating for establishing an Office of Gun Violence Prevention. That is why I've been advocating on the campaign trail and every single Zoom forum we're in, that we can get to zero gun violence in this community. But all of us need to get off the sidelines, and the mayor needs to step in and treat the gun violence pandemic in the same way that we've treated the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, thank you for everything that you're doing on behalf of all of us.
Jessyn, thank you so much for that answer. Had a quick follow-up for you. Now that the next mayor will have the important task, obviously, of selecting our new police chief. Some have argued that responsibility should be made by someone who has experience with the daily realities that our BIPOC residents face, especially with regards to interactions with law enforcement. So why do you feel you're best suited for Black and Brown communities to trust you with that decision in terms of the next police chief?
Yeah, I think that issue of trust is really profound. And at the end of the day, what this election is all about. So it is a really important question. And, you know, I think my answer is number one on that issue of trust. It is about showing up. I have devoted the last 4 years when I haven't been in elective office, you know, being on the boardway of Community Passageways, volunteering for 940, and really working to prevent and decrease youth gun violence. That really matters. I think the second thing around a police chief is that police chief is going to have to be a true partner in the really hard work of culture and organizational change. And my belief is that the community vision of public safety has to be that every single person in our community feels safe, particularly our Black and Brown friends, neighbors, and family members as they go about their day-to-day lives. And that the police chief has to have a background and experience in the hard work of organizational change and transformation, because that's our task, and it's all of our task.
Thank you. So we do believe in audience participation, and so we are going to ask a few questions that were submitted by our audience members here. I will do so in random order. So the first question I want to lob up actually to Bruce, and it's from Susan Neef. Susan asks, unregistered guns seem to be readily available for purchase on Seattle streets. What do you propose to address this problem?
So again, this is one of the purviews that the state seems to, the reason I like state to get out of the preemption is such, again, cities, the gun policies here, and I'll answer the question directly, but the gun policies here in city may be different than what people want in Spokane or Oregon, Washington, and the state is just, again, they're not doing enough for us. So what we'll do with respect to unregistered guns is precisely pass as many local laws as we can to make sure we have proper registration. I think we need to look at the purchasing age of guns and perhaps increase that. We were unable to get that in this particular session. I think we need to look at the kind of mandatory training that goes into guns as well. But with respect to registration, again, we know how easily people can get guns. And so again, this is an area where the city could really beef up the procedures and make sure, and even limit the number of guns a person could purchase in a month. A person shouldn't be able to purchase 20 guns at once. So the city should be able to show some leadership in this zone, and I'll certainly lead the way.
All right. Councilmember Gonzalez, same question to you. How do we get these unregistered guns off the streets here?
Yeah, you know, I was really proud to work with a lot of folks in this Zoom room, members of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility, but also Grandmothers Against Gun Violence and Everytown and many others, Moms Demand Action, when we worked together to craft some legislation to that specifically address this issue around illegal guns and getting them off the streets. Look, as gun owners, we have a responsibility, those who own guns have a responsibility to report when they have a firearm that was stolen or lost. We know that that is the main way in which these illegal firearms make it into the market. And so, it's about enforcing that particular perspective, but also about engaging in deep community engagement to make sure that folks understand what their responsibilities are. And then lastly, I'll say that, well, I'm out of time. Sorry.
Oh, wait. You have everybody on the edge of your seat, Councilmember González. So what was the last point you wanted to make?
I was also going to talk about how it's also important to recognize the impacts around suicide as a result of this. I know we talk a lot about them in terms of the creation of crime, but I also think it's important for us to keep in mind that these illegal firearms play a huge role in the suicide of so many members of our community, which is why I have prioritized efforts to focus on those reporting obligations.
Thank you. I do want to make sure everybody has a chance to answer to this question. So, Ace, same question to you. How do we get these unregistered guns off of our Seattle streets here?
I believe the previous response was a really good one, and I would like to build on that. So really, if we look at the way that we have guns registered, if we ensure that there's almost a continuous registration of those guns, that way we ensure that they're still where they're supposed to be, they're still with the lawful owners. I think in that way, kind of similar to how we make sure that people renew their car tabs every year, that we're making sure that people are abiding by the current laws, and also that we can really keep track of things. Related to the idea of preemption, what I also want to really highlight with that is that if we have very specific laws here in Seattle and someone can go down to Renton or go down to Kent and are able to acquire a gun in a different way, then that does not make us as a community any safer if it's that close. And so I believe we really should be focusing on statewide models in order to take our really great laws and already improve them and improve them that much more.
Thank you. Jessyn, same question to you.
Thank you so much. I think, again, there are some good answers that have been stated. Clearly, being an advocate for preemption matters, and the mayor has a real bully pulpit and the resources of the city to advocate for that. It also means, though, resourcing enforcement of current laws that we have on the books, whether it is around safe storage, around implementation of extreme risk protection orders. And then again, that intersectional approach around gun violence generally. So I'm going to keep my answer short on that one because we've talked about it, but those would be the three basic approaches.
Thank you, Jessyn. Colleen, finally to you on that question.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And, I know that the idea of gun buybacks has been controversial, and it hasn't always been as successful as we'd like them to be. But I think it's still an option to be explored. Let me tell you why, because I am fortunate to work with people who often have guns or other weapons. And that's because they're afraid for their safety. They're out there on the street. They're, always afraid. Being homeless, you feel afraid because of things that could happen to you. I think that some of those folks, if they were offered a buyback opportunity, would do it and be excited about it. I also think that we need to think about gun safes. I come from a family that, did subsistence fishing and hunting growing up in rural Alaska. Gun safes save lives. They do, and we have to help them. We have to get them to be more accessible. If we have to give them away to people, whatever we need to do to make sure that if someone breaks in their home, they're not able to get those guns. Those are some of the ideas I have, and I would be wanting to follow the leadership of this organization to implement new ideas at City Hall.
Thank you, Colleen. Well, we happen to have 5 candidates, and we have 5 audience questions. So I will parcel these out individually to you folks. So this question comes from Casey, and I will direct it at you, Councilmember González. Casey's question is, in a dense urban Seattle, where do you think guns should be allowed?
this goes against my magic wand answer. I do think that obviously we have a Second Amendment and people have the right to bear arms. I do continue to believe that needs to be done safely and responsibly, and believe that that's possible, which is exactly why I was the prime sponsor behind city-based legislation to implement a safe storage firearms ordinance in our city that was immediately legally challenged by the NRA. We won at the trial court level, but unfortunately it's still wrapped up in some litigation. So again, I think that firearms in our city need to be, regardless of where they're at, given the Second Amendment, need to be in those safe storage boxes that we provided funding for in order for the Seattle-King County Public Health Authority to give discounted prices for, and in some instances provide for free. So they should be locked up, kept away, and without ammunition.
Thank you, Councilmember. Bruce, this question will be directed at you. This question comes from Nancy. She says, how would you leverage the resources of city government to address gun violence as a public health epidemic?
Thank you. So with any health epidemic, the first part starts with education and data to expose to the public, to expose to everyone, number one, what the symptoms are, what the best treatments are throughout the city. And you will see in other cities that do not have preemption. And we have to understand something. Washington is a minority state with respect to preemption. That makes us unique. You'll see in other cities that have addressed this as a health crisis, they prevent people from having a gun if they are intoxicated, as an example. They prevent people from having a gun if they have mental illness conditions, as an example. And so the way we deal with the health crisis is we use the data, we look at treatment, and our policies adjust or are implemented accordingly. And quite candidly, you'll see all of that work in my candidacy as mayor. You'll see that work done at a cabinet level position.
Thank you, Bruce. All right, this next question goes to Colleen. This is from Cheryl. Cheryl asks, what are your top 3 priorities for taking city action to prevent gun violence, and why do you prioritize them in that way?
Well, thank you so much for the question. And you can find all this info on our website. But in order, foster youth violence prevention. I mean, I'll talk about it. Reduce the shootings and also improve life outcomes. So youth violence prevention, this is something that is already been talked about during this forum, but cannot be emphasized enough. One of my first jobs ever in the city of Seattle was working for a high school and with kids who are experiencing homelessness. And I can tell you, youth violence was just a part of their everyday life. We have to have the prevention programs. The city should be resourcing groups we've already talked about, community passageways, Choose 180, and other BIPOC-led organizations who have some special nuances within their communities that we should be considering. This is incredibly important as we move forward. We also need to find ways to reduce shootings. So I've already talked about a ceasefire. I think that the city of Seattle should be leading the way. The mayor's office should be leading the way so that we are encouraging are reducing the amount of shootings and stopping the shootings that are happening right now. It is truly unacceptable. And then improve life outcomes. You know, there's many ways for us to do this. One thing that I'm excited about is the hospital prevention programs and ideas. Check out the website and you'll see more on that.
Thank you, Colleen. All right, and this next question comes from Dylan and is directed at you, Jessyn. Dylan asks, what will you do to ensure there's a more robust regional approach to preventing gun violence?
Thank you so much for that question. You know, gun violence prevention, obviously the city has to be a leader, but we need to be working in concert with jurisdictions around Seattle, as well as King County and the state level. And so part of that begins with articulating a vision of what it is that we're trying to do. We are trying to get to zero gun violence in our community. And that means working with the surrounding communities to embrace that vision as well. Because gun violence, of course, doesn't, start and stop in Seattle. It's an issue that every single community faces. And so it means building partnerships with other cities to be doing things like investing in thriving communities. One of the things that I'm running on is a massive investment in affordable housing, and that's something that we need to be doing regionally. It means working on enforcing the laws that we already have on the books together, and then it also means investing in those community-based organizations that are doing the work of youth gun violence prevention.
Thank you, Jessyn. Now, Ace, last but not least, this question comes from Barbara. What will you do to prevent suicide across our city? Washington has much higher rates of suicide than other states.
So I already touched on this in a number of different ways, and I used my actual training when I was a resident assistant. They trained us on how to help prevent suicides because a lot of people who are going to school are dealing with a lot of very strong mental health issues. And so I think similar to our Health One program, we should be really focused on alternatives in public safety and specifically addressing mental health in order to prevent suicides. I think a big part of a lot of reasons why people are choosing to end their lives is because they really don't see a future. And so we should be investing more in building community programs. And for myself, that also means investing in more community centers, as well as really ensuring that we provide people resources and opportunities so they feel like they have a pathway forward. They feel like they have a way that they can be successful. And at the end of the day, when we empower individuals to feel like they can take control of their own lives, then they actually want to live their life.
Thank you. Now, this is a question for all of you, and so I'll try to make sure that everybody certainly gets an opportunity to answer it. This comes from Paula. Paula asked, do you have any major role models? In other words, are there Seattle mayors, are mayors of other cities, and not just mayors, but we can draw from other places as well and other positions as well, that you take inspiration from? Or that you've learned from? Who are they and why? Can we, Colleen, I'll actually start with you. Do you have any political role models who you are inspired by?
Yeah, I actually have many and come from the tribal community. I'm very fortunate to be the granddaughter of a traditional chief, Katie John from Metasta Lake. And she is one of the leading community members who fought for subsistence fishing and hunting in rural Alaska. When the colonized Alaska state government said, you can't do what you've always done in these places, she fought them for over 30 years. And she fought them with tenacity and with passion for her community. And that is something that I bring to every role that I am fortunate to be in. She also taught me to be a servant leader. She said that part of the responsibility of our community, we're in the headwaters of the Copper River. The part of our responsibility as being the village from the headwaters is to take care of the people that are downstream. That's why prevention is so important for me. My grandma Katie, a traditional chief, not traditionally elected like other people in this place that we live in right now, but truly a political figure that has changed the world for many Indigenous people.
Thank you, Colleen. All right, Jessyn, same question. Do you have any political role models? And if so, why are they your role models?
That's a great question. I immediately thought of House Speaker Lori Jenkins, and it is in part because of her long-lasting and very focused work on 3 issues that we've made tremendous progress on: marriage equality, gun violence prevention, and tax reform. And doing both a combination of very strategic and at times incremental, but combined with large narrative reframing and combined with taking really big steps when the moment aligns. And I think that those three things politically are really powerful. And, she's really been involved in all three of those movements, and we've seen such great progress. And there's obviously a lot more work to do, but I really look to her in the combination of those three things.
Thank you. Councilmember Gonzalez, who are your political role models?
I have two. Both are women of color. The first is Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who I'm proud to have earned the support of in this mayoral race. From her, I learned what it means to build movements from the inside through co-governance, meaning that we leverage the assets that are in our communities, particularly our BIPOC communities, to help shape the policy solutions to create the transformational change around racial justice, equity, and continuing to lift us all up towards a better life. And the importance of telling our story and the strength in resilience and struggle is what I have learned from her. She's also smart as a cookie. The second person that is my role model is my mom. She taught me what it means to fight for what is right. She taught herself how to read, how to write, how to do math. She only had 2 weeks of formal education. She's the hardest working woman I have ever had the pleasure of meeting, and I'm lucky to be her daughter.
Thank you, Councilmember. Ace, who are your political role models?
So I have a few. The first one I'm going to start with is Mayor Anne Hidalgo of Paris. She is someone who has been a leader in terms of combating climate change, and is someone who has been so focused on not necessarily just making Paris a sustainable city, but really encouraging people and getting people out into the community. And I think that's one of the best ways that you actually start to see a lot of the issues addressed in any city, is when people actually are able to come together, especially in public. The second person that I can think of is Senator Elizabeth Warren. It was something where I was a huge Warren Democrat, and her call for big structural change is something that I believe is absolutely necessary if we are going to actually see the shifts in our communities, while also creating plans for every single thing that we intend on doing. And the last person that I will bring up is just being from Texas, that Representative Barbara Jordan is someone who is a legend as part of our history, and someone who broke barriers and never was afraid to speak truth to power.
Thank you for that. Bruce, who are your political role models? I know you already named a couple earlier.
I'm going to keep it local, and I'm going to talk about, of course, Norm Rice, who is a friend and mentor, as the first African-American mayor 25 years ago.
Bruce, it looks like you're muted.
Can I get my time back?
Executive decision, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I got a powerful few seconds here. So I'm going to keep it local because I thought that was originally the idea. But so Norm Rice, of course, who was the first African-American mayor over 25 years, who's a mentor and a friend of mine, I applaud him for making history. Wes Ullman is another friend who really led the city in one of the most tumultuous times. And he appointed a first Black fire chief, and Claude Harris, the first Black parks, and Walt Hundley. My parents were entry level at the city during that time. And these were tough times. And a lot of people, the young adults, need to know that back during these times in the 60s and 70s, what you're seeing now, we saw back then. It was the civil rights era. And Gary Locke, another person, and all three of these people have endorsed my candidacy. Gary Locke made history as the first Asian and governor and King County exec. And again, cutting through barriers, making history, bold leadership. And I think that's what the city wants.
Thank you, Bruce. Well, it looks like time flies, and it's already closing in on closing statements of the candidates. But before we get into those, we do have a quick poll for our audience. The question should soon pop up on your screen if it hasn't already. The question is, based on what you've heard here today, who has earned your vote as a champion of gun violence prevention? All right, looks like the Looks like the votes are coming in here. Thank you to everybody for participating. And we are now going to go ahead and move on to our closing statements from the candidates. We do want to give each candidate 2 minutes for their closing statement, and we know that they have a lot to say. So this time, we're going to go alphabetically by first name. We started out opening statements alphabetically by last name. So we're going to go ahead and go alphabetically by first name this go around. So Ace, that means you are up first with your closing statement. You have 2 minutes.
So first off, I just want to say a quick thank you to the Alliance for Gun Responsibility and everyone who came to share this space today. I believe that it's really important to have these conversations as we really get to the nitty-gritty of what is absolutely necessary in order to achieve a city that is truly sustainable, not just environmentally or economically, but also culturally. And so for me, it's critical to do this work now and to really listen to communities so that when I am in office, I am able to act with expediency. It is something where during our past mayoral term that we have had an executive who has really kicked the can on a lot of different things. And what I am really focused on is really providing an alternative to our last 2 mayors who have been career politicians who have said all the right things during their campaigns only to either compromise or really not truly address those who need help most. And so that is why I have proposed my plans and policy, which are really aimed at a holistic look at how we make true structural change in our city and lift everyone up, starting with those with the least first. And so I ask for your support and your vote as we enter through this primary for a alternative to the status quo. I believe it is through our work together that we will be able to see so many of the things that we always want and to truly become the Seattle that we always say that we are.
All right. 20 seconds to spare. Anything else? All right.
Go to my website, aghforsea.com.
All right. Thank you. All right, Bruce, you're up next with your closing statement. You have 2 minutes.
Well, they said I could have 20 seconds, and so I like 2:20. But in all seriousness, thank you for putting this forum together. You are bringing attention to one of the most significant issues that our city's facing. And I'm pleased to see that you sort of required that whoever's the next mayor will have a cabinet level position, as I suggested, to make sure that our policies are in place and our implementation is in place. I said earlier that this was personal. You know, I spent many years on these play fields dealing with our youth, particularly our kids of color, teaching them football and baseball and basketball. And I had a situation where I actually had to remove a gun from 2 kids that were fighting. And that's one example of many I could share with you, having grown up here in Seattle, where I've seen just firsthand what guns in the wrong hands can do. And that's why your magic wand question was awesome, because I continue to think in the work that I do is how a person can not have the impulse control, or how they are walking with untreated trauma, and how guns are so abundant in our society and what a mayor can do about it. And I think the voters are looking for someone that has a proven track record on getting things done, on fighting for justice, fighting for strong safety. And I came out really bold when I announced my candidacy, and I had retired from politics, and I said, you know, I don't subscribe to a defund model, because nothing in all of my training and all of my work says you starve a department from resources in trying to make it optimal, trying to make it effective. So under my candidacy, and I ask for your support, and I ask for more than your support, I ask you to help me get elected, because we are running on a position of hope and faith and love and hard work, because again, the stakes are too high in the city to get this wrong. So I ask for your support, and thank you so much for putting on this forum. It's been an awesome forum.
Thank you, Bruce. All right, Colleen, you're up next. You have 2 minutes for your closing statement.
Great. Well, thank you for being such strong advocates on such an important issue. You know, I mentioned earlier that I've had a lot of experience, and it truly burdens me and fills me with grief about the many times that this community has had to struggle with gun violence. You know, when COVID really hit us hard, when I was working at the Chief Seattle Club, one of the new programs we implemented immediately was a domestic violence program for folks who are experiencing homelessness. When you're experiencing homelessness, domestic violence means something different. And so we created a new program that explicitly serves that community. And as mayor of the city, I promise you that I will be innovative and I will be a fighter for those who have been experiencing gun violence and also in prevention. I mentioned it earlier, but I have been a change maker throughout my career. That's what I have been lucky enough to do, fighting for our communities who have been impacted the most by homelessness. I also, as a community police commissioner, I have stood with community groups like El Centro de la Raza and ACLU to not support the 2018 Seattle police officers contract. As you all know, the mayor and the city council voted for that contract, and the contract pushed us out of compliance with the consent decree. And we all saw the results this summer. We have to have new leadership to negotiate the next contract. New leadership that knows how to make those difficult decisions and put people first, not a political agenda. I am running for mayor to be a public servant. I am so fortunate to have elders in my community that I went to and I talked to about running for mayor. And one of them was my Uncle Fred John, the son of Katie John, who I mentioned earlier. He said, Colleen, I want you to run for mayor, and I want you to remember that there's no word for leader in our language. The word for leader translates as servant. And that is what I will bring to the city, a true public servant. Thank you so much for considering me, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Colleen. All right. Jessyn, we'll move to you for your closing statements. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for attending today. And thank you so much for all of the advocacy work that so many of you do every single day. It truly is making a difference. And I want to reiterate my commitment to getting to zero gun violence in this community. And I say that because I believe that we can truly do this. Gun violence truly is preventable. And there are so many good things that we are already doing that we need to commit to scaling up and bringing the urgency that we've brought to the COVID-19 pandemic. That includes things like implementing our extreme risk protection order law. It means scaling up the great work that organizations like Community Passageways and Choose 180 and Creative Justice and other organizations are doing to prevent and restore and create thriving communities in Seattle. We know that when we are investing in communities, when we are making sure that every single person has safe housing, safe and stable housing, when every single person knows that they have economic stability, when they feel loved and cherished for who they are, that is what reduces gun violence, as much as better regulations, as much as better budgets. So I am going to commit to that. I have committed to that on the campaign trail, and I commit as mayor to every single day waking up to working with you to get us to zero gun violence. I am so appreciative and humbled by the work that you all have been doing, and I look forward as your next mayor to get to join you in this very, very important and urgent work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessyn. All right, Councilmember González, you have 2 minutes for your closing statement.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for the important conversation and the opportunity to be here with all of you. I've had an opportunity to work with many of you on some of my priorities as a sitting city council member, and would welcome the opportunity to build on that work that we have done together to keep our community safe from gun violence, preventable gun violence, if elected to be the next mayor of this great city. I have championed laws around safe storage of firearms, which is a proven way to prevent gun violence in our community as a result of stolen or lost firearms. And it also prevents suicide of our kids, who are the ones who are accessing these guns at a disproportionate rate and dying within our homes and the homes of our friends and our family. I've also championed allocating revenue to ongoing research to make sure that we are approaching the issue of gun violence through a public health lens and supporting public health solutions to addressing the public health crisis that is gun violence within our communities. And I have also increased the laws related to penalties for those irresponsible gun owners who have failed to report lost or stolen firearms that make their way into the hands of individuals who then use those firearms to hurt our community members. This is the work that is hard, it is controversial in some circles, but it is the important work of the next mayor to continue to build on that foundation and to move our city in the right direction towards no death by gun violence in our city. And lastly, I will continue to work as mayor with all of you and with our state partners and with our federal partners to continue that transformational change that will truly make our community safe, both in reform and in investments in the safety of our community.
Thank you, Councilmember. And thank you to all of our candidates here today. We appreciate how seriously you all take this issue and appreciate you all taking the time to be here today. And also we recognize and acknowledge how hard it is to run for elected office. So, good luck to all of you. A quick thank you as well to Grandmothers Against Gun Violence and also the South Seattle Emerald for being the media sponsor for this event today. One final note to our audience: ballots do drop on July 16th, so keep an eye out on your mailboxes, and also keep an eye out for another candidate forum on gun violence, this time with candidates for City Council position number 9 on July 13th. Thank you. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay cool, and we'll talk more later. Thank you.